computer, yes. All right,
Good morning.
so welcome. I'm going to pass it over to Marianne Sutherland, who is going to talk to us about type and the world we live in, the reality of 2021. So over to you, Marianne.
Thank you very much. Well, welcome everybody. I can't see all of you, but I've seen you all the other days. And so in my mind, I'm envisioning you as we go through. I want to just introduce just a little bit of my background before we start. I'm an ISFP, and I had the typical ISFP or SP experience through school, but because I was an only child, there were 2 against 1, and my dad was an ISTJ and my mom an ESFJ, and they thought school was very important. So that was my introduction to school. My dad would always say to me, Marianne, how do you know where the cutoff is for, whatever the mark is? If it was 70, I'd get it. If it was 90, I'd get it. If it was 20, I'd get it, or 30. And I just didn't like school, but I didn't also want to disappoint them, I think. So it was interesting. And how I ended up becoming interested in type, when I finished in grade 12, no one thought I was going to go on, because I hadn't been that enthusiastic about school in my first 12 years, and I thought I should go into teaching. And I don't know why, but I think now, after 32 years of teaching and being away from it for a while, I think I did it out of spite, just because I thought schools really should change. They really don't deal properly with their students. So I think that's what started my career. But from type, in about 1983, I think, I taught, should let you know, for I think 32 years. I graduated in 1972, and I had a specialization in reading. I loved to read, which some people have said this week, that ISPs don't really like to do. I think my mom started walking me to the library when I was about 2. And I think she made sure that became a love. And they always made sure I had books. And that was very, very important, I think. So in 1983 at the university, I'd already graduated and was teaching, and I really wanted help how to change the classrooms and the schools that I was working at. So there was a type, temperament, and teaching styles course given, and so I took it. And then there was an orientation to the Myers-Briggs in 1983. But there was no training, I don't think, at that time. So what I did was I went to Florida. I had a little 3-week kind of sabbatical, and our school district was offering that, and I took this 1983 with Mary McCauley and Gordon Lawrence, the orientation to the Myers-Briggs. And then the next year, I think it was one of the first qualification workshops, I'm not sure, but I did that in San Diego in 1984 with Naomi Quank and Margaret Hartzler. And that was where I started to look at my students, myself, and then other individuals, and realized, oh my gosh, this really speaks to me. So that was my beginning with type, and from that point I found it an extremely valuable tool my whole life. I did the training for step 2 with I think Susan Brock and Jean Kummerow 1997. It isn't something that I use that often. I always go back to the original. I don't know why, but so just a little background with my background in type. I've always found it like an extremely valuable tool to share with, you know, educators, with students, with parents, with teams, etc. Um, Now, what I wanted to talk about today, type and the world we live in, this reality of 2021, we're at 100 years and the world has changed so dramatically. And now in preparation for this, I did a survey with everyone that, uh, that would do it for me. And I have a handout of 4 pages, and I'll walk you through this. It's a bit overwhelming to look at it on its own, but I wanted to see what individuals um, who I knew their types. I wanted to see what they were thinking about the world in general, how things had changed, how life had changed for them, how how children had changed, how teens had changed, how they thought individuals had changed. And I was interested to notice that there were some type related opinions that came through. And so the handout that I've given you, in brackets, it has the opinion that either all have given, and those usually were age-related opinions, or else the opinion from the individual. And I went back to the temperament groups because it was just too unwieldy to do all the types. So that's what your handout gives you, is this is the results of the survey that I did and what I was finding. Okay, let's begin. Um, Now, Susan, tell me here. Ah, it works. Okay. This has been such an interesting time in our lives. I found out that we've been locked down for, as everyone else has, um, for over a year. And I found out I probably could be in jail. I'm just fine with it. You know, I have all sorts of things to do. I have projects that I still wanted to do, but I haven't gotten them done. Uh, so technically, you know, going into the bank in a mask and gloves is fine now. I think I'm going to continue it after, you know, everything gets back to normal. I love the gloves because you don't have to touch anything that's really icky. And the mask is not bad either. So I'm afraid I may be doing this for longer than I think. Um, no, whoops, I'm going backwards. Sorry. Uh, I think for me, the one thing that this whole pandemic has brought is the time that I've watched the news and I've watched what's happened in the world. I haven't been. I love the news, but I didn't watch it religiously, you know, day in and day out. And I found that we're seeing all sorts of things happening in this year that are bringing to our attention, you know, issues that we hadn't. Maybe we knew they existed, but we didn't know how dramatic they were. So I'm finding that as the news goes along, I've been really interested in some of the things that were happening, and your handout will talk a little bit about that and what I've noted from my type and what's been happening around the world. Um, I think this is my favorite slide, and I think the whole issue of differences has come up more and more as the pandemic has brought this to our attention. Now, I'm not going to ask you to tell me anything about these two gentlemen, but just in your minds, I want you to just look at these two young men and just speculate on who they are and what they do. I think that again, this whole reckoning that we're in this year has given us a, a view of stereotyping or not. So you can uh, keep in mind who and what you think they do. Um, it's interesting. I tried it out on some of my group from my questionnaire. So I'll tell you the results later. Um, now, these two gentlemen were from California, and they worked in a care home there, and the care home went bankrupt. So there were 16 elderly residents that were abandoned. And so one gentleman was a janitor and one was the cook, and they stayed behind to care for residents at their own expense. It's very interesting. And when I talked to some people when they looked at they looked first at the gentleman, and I thought it was interesting some of their responses. So you can match your response to the visual. I looked at, this is one of the handouts. I've given you a 4-page handout of what I found. And apparently it's, I had someone view it and they think it's backwards. So I'm gonna just walk you through it a little bit, and then we'll continue on a little bit more quickly. What I've done is, this is from my survey. I surveyed as many people as I knew. And I wanted them to look at the changes that have happened over their lives, what they've seen happen. Some were older, some as old as 80, and some as young as late teens. I didn't have anybody younger than that. And what you'll notice, there are 4 of these, and as we go, we'll break it into 4 sections. This one is on the pace of life that we're living now. Now, the first, again, the news has really interested me. And the first little box here, I was watching the news and they were talking about Zoom. And they were talking about all the positives. The positives are on the right. The negatives that people saw or thought or speculated are in the middle. And then this one has the negatives going over into the actual right side, is just where that information came from, or what the topic is for those negatives and positives. So now I'm going to let you read these on your own at some point if you haven't had a chance to look at them. That was my handout, but I'll let you do that at another time. But I wanted to bring to your attention something that I thought was so interesting in the news. The young woman who had done this study on Zoom, and the fact that we are living in a time where we're living through Zoom, we're having a conference through Zoom. And so what she had found were the first 2 things on our list here, the negatives. She'd found that, of course, there's a lot of Zoom fatigue. People are very nervous that companies are going to continue to use Zoom and not have face-to-face, fly their folks around the country. They'll save a lot of money, and they'll leave people in this kind of virtual world. Of course, the advances, we know we can have meeting, we can talk to each other, we can share information all over the world. The other most interesting effect that this young woman found in the news, in her news report, and she did a significant 2 or 3 month study. Zoom dissatisfaction with our own image was the negative, that's in the middle. She said business for plastic surgeons, and that's in the positive, might be positive or negative, I don't know. There was 100-fold business increase for plastic surgeons in North America because of Zoom dissatisfaction with our own image. So she was very surprised at that particular fact. Now, the rest of this just goes through the pace of our life, the pace of our lives that we've been living for so many years, um, things have sped up. We read all sorts of, you know, theorists. Glick talks about hurry sickness. What's happening? Some of the positives are for SPs, for example, in school, they're staying longer and I think they're much more interested in school. Um, they're exposed to, people are exposed to a variety of information, many accomplishments for young people beyond their years. And that pace of life has sort of intensified. So we're going to go into this a little bit as we go along. The negatives, and these are all from the survey. Um, the One of my NT friends said we're just, he was worried that we're bored with anything that's too wordy, that's too maybe intellectual. People are texting, you know, their thumbs are going, children are rushed from a multitude of activities. We've stopped this year and we've pulled back. And a lot of these things came from a backward look. And they said, you know, last year we were running to ballet, to whatever. We've stopped that and we've had a look at the pace and the speed of our life. So it was interesting. A lot of the NFs talked about that, but they also talked in the negative about we don't have deep acquaintances. We have passing, you know, social media type acquaintances. And so that was certainly an area that was a concern. The other area, though, was they thought that the speed and pace of life had certainly allowed young people to experience more, but then on the other side, was that good or bad? Certainly bullying via social media was an issue that I put it here, but I've got it in a couple of other places as well. But that pace of clicking and getting to know people, and not very superficially, and being sort of alone in their own worlds, in their cyber world, but yet really do they know each other? And so I think for those of us who study type, I think we realize how important it is to have that interaction with people positively, sometimes even negatively. One of the other issues that came up with pace of life was the rise in suicides from online harassment. And so that was something that was much more significant in our world now than it was before. So I'll leave this, these are in your notes and your handouts, and they're self-explanatory. The one that goes over into the third column is a continuation of the negatives. My survey folks had many more negatives than they thought positives for the pace of life that we were seeing. And certainly the NFs more than anybody else were concerned about that interpersonal relationship that was lost with that pace of life, not getting to deeply connect with people, to understand, to text, to mail, no last names, etc. All right. Again, the pace, we've been gridlocked. And Glick is a very interesting author. He writes his book, he coined the term hurry sickness. And he talks about us running from place to place, you know, the placebo of the close the door to the elevator. It doesn't really close it. It just makes us feel better. Speed dial, all of those kinds of things that we see. We were multitasking, we were channel flipping, where films and television have increased dramatically. The pace of viewing has been quite dramatic, and we'll talk about that a little bit farther along here. So that was certainly one thing that people were concerned about. And we know from brain researchers that environmental events are causing molecular changes in the brain. And it's frightening to think what we're doing to some of our children. And when we go into this a little farther, that point will be very important, I think, because we're seeing with children, and brain researchers are seeing with children dramatic changes. And the pace of our existence is probably one of those reasons. My NT was not concerned at all. He thought that was just sort of a fact of our existence, and that was, an evolutionary process. And so I was interested in that. We had a long discussion about that. He didn't feel the frenzy as much as some of the other groups. Now, I'm going to leave these handouts for you. I want us not to read them. I just want you to look at these as a summary, and they'll be available for you anytime you want them. I just want you to take a little walk with me through this to see how dramatic really the lists are. When I thought, environmental issues, and I'd done this before with another group a number of years ago, the positive trends, all the knowledge that we're able to access information that's at our fingertips. Standard of living has increased. We have time-saving devices, etc. But the negatives are very interesting, and the technological illnesses that this speed and pace has caused. So I'm not going to go into this. I leave that for you to read at your leisure. We'll end, this kind of introduction with Kachaluk at the end says, enemy is time poverty. We're not spending the time that we need to with each other. Our children are being shortchanged. Their minds are changing dramatically because of this pace. So I'm going to flip through these. They're available to you. Again, the frenzy pace, the instant gratification, etc. So those are available for you. We're in the throwaway society, competitions. Now, the one thing that I wanted to point out on this one, and again, it's very interesting, especially for schools, they're seeing a dramatic increase of young people who look like they have attention problems. And what a lot of theorists are talking about, and a lot of types are talking about it as well. The SPs, I think, are not as much, but especially my NF group from my survey were concerned about how dramatically and quickly they were seeing, that attention of younger people. The older they were, the more they were able to understand what pseudo ADD was, and how they were much more able to concentrate for longer periods of time than they thought their children had been, than they thought their grandchildren had been. And so there's this information for you to read at your leisure. But, oh, sorry, I don't want to go to that quite yet. As we go through, there are a couple of studies that will explain that. So keep pseudo ADD in mind as we go through, this area. The other concern that more my NF group from my survey had than anyone else, but my SJ participants were concerned as well. They were concerned at the loss of direction, I think. And so they would like to go back to the one thing, that they wanted was a little bit of advice from their elderly counterparts. So I was interested in that. The NTs were not that concerned. They weren't concerned that someone, parent, grandparent were directing young children. They weren't concerned that, in 2020, we have children more able to make those choices than in the past. Now, this will introduce us into the area of online. Good morning, children. I'm Miss Givens. If you have any questions, you can reach me at www. Lots of the participants in my survey and lots of scientists are talking about online, not only bullying, but students and children online too soon, using tablets, using computers, and some of the pediatrics associations are talking about children and online and our brains. Now, my NT again, my one NT especially, but a couple of them were talking about the fact that they fly a lot and they like to travel, and they're really glad about children being online because they keep quiet on the plane. So I thought that was fascinating. Now, young people have certainly more opinions than probably my generation for sure, and my parents' generation for sure, which would have been at the beginning of this 100 years. Now, almost all of my group from the questionnaire were a bit concerned about that. They were concerned about the balance with children, definitely we wanted to hear their opinions, but they were a little concerned that they didn't want to hear all their opinions all the time about our 2% approval rating. I don't know that any of us who went to school before 19 or 2010 would have talked to their principal about, don't call my mom before her coffee. Again, it's I had a split in the group with the questionnaire, and they were happy that young people had much could say, had wanted to talk about their accomplishments and what they really wanted. But there was concern, and almost with all my participants, that there was a little, sometimes too much enthusiasm there. Now, the most interesting, I think, part of the survey came when it's on the second page, and when we look at television viewing and phones, that goes on to the third page of our survey. The phone and internet have made such a dramatic difference to all types, but certain types have been dramatically affected for sure. Now, we went into the literacy trends, and this is the second page of your handout. Now, ESPN in North America is a television station that looks at sports, I think. But this young man has been watching a little bit too much TV, and his alphabet has been, amazingly compromised by ESPN. And this is certainly one for the ages, I think. If anyone uses my husband and my friends go, I can't stand this. And it's interesting, the differences in, our ability to put a sentence together and make ourselves know. So this one was kind of cute and clever, but it certainly is one that concerns me. It also concerns all sorts of scientists, and it concerns all sorts of people who study uh, children's behavior. And preschoolers who spent more time in front of the screen had lower structural integrity of white brain matter in areas of the brain, or a brain wiring that relates to language, literacy, imagination, executive functioning, such as self-regulation. This was a study done. The studies are in the article that's on um, the website. So you've got all the references there. This was done on CBC, I think, or CTV, which is a Canadian news group. And they were talking about the studies that were done with children watching television, using screens, tablets, etc. And they were talking about the brain wiring and the relationship that it had to language, literacy, imagination, and executive functioning. Now, this continues on with that same area. And what it was finding is that they were measuring concerns with language literacy and speed of processing, the speed at which individuals take in information. Now, I have some stats. I'm going to show you one page of like 100 that I have. But over the years, I did lots of assessment in schools. That's where I spent most of my time. I think I didn't say that in the introduction. When I worked in high school for 25 years, but I had worked in an elementary junior high school for a couple of years at the very beginning. I was doing a lot of assessment, and I didn't ever have a class. I had a total free reign, and anyone that was having difficulty in school came to me. So I was supposed to figure out what was wrong. My favorite person in the world was an administrator, and he was an INTJ. And we got to know each other very well. We worked together for a few years. And eventually, at first he would spend like an hour telling me what this student, his concerns were. And finally he would just knock on the door and say, Marianne, here's John, just fix him. And so I would continue on and, try to fix John if I could. But so that was what I did for my career. But there was interesting, now the study that came out just this year talks about the visual processing speed and how young people, their eyes are not taking information in as quickly or as quickly as is necessary. So they have visual processing speed difficulties. And of 750 students that I had over a 25-year period assessed, 366 of them had speed processing difficulties. So that was quite a concern. And that comes from television viewing, tablet viewing, etc. This is a sheet, and it's old, it has no names or whatever. But what I was looking at, the correlation was, if you look at the column 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, there's a speed column there. And if there was an extreme dramatic difference between one way of taking information, for example, if their mind reasoning at the 99th percentile, but the speed at which they're processing visually is at the 7th percentile, there was an extreme difference. And I thought years ago, I'm going to be famous for this. And so in 2019, and this was just on the news, the study finds changes in brain wiring among students who get too much screen time. And lo and behold, they find that speed of processing is the issue. And there's my 366 individuals over the course of time that as they're, because all of these kids were brought up on television. I, I had television by the time I was 5. So that as we were looking more at tablets, as we're looking more at screens, the speed of processing is deteriorating, and which makes quite a difference for students learning to read, literacy, all sorts of different areas. So that was a dramatic difference for sure. And now the American Academy of Pediatrics again said high screen exposure led to lower expressive language, literacy skills, ability to quickly name objects. Now think of the NF students and the NT students who love language, who love that use of expressive language, if things are not working for them. That frustration is extreme. Speed of processing was impaired in so many of the students. They were not playing independently outside. They were not interacting with their caregivers or other children. It was very interesting, this study. And a lot of it came from the speed at which things are moving on our internet, children who are looking at too much television, too much tablet use, etc., etc. So some of that is there, and all the references are in the article that exists there. Now we've sort of covered this one a little bit because we did tablet and whatever, but I thought this was a very significant slide. I know that a lot of parents have their children have their phones for safety considerations, but I remember the little phone that this young person had, or this older person had when they were 6. And I know that I have a phone like the one on top, but I don't use it very often. It's somewhere. However, there's a significant concern that people are starting to look at with the use of phone, digital connection, social media. And this is I think the 3rd page in your handout. You have all this information here. The positives that people saw were on the one side, the negatives were on the other. And if a certain type had a really strong, dramatic opinion, I put them in brackets. Otherwise, almost all types said this, we're expressing this particular concern, that parents were able to stay connected to their children. That was a positive. All my types thought that was fine. Parents see a phone as a safety factor. That was great. They were becoming technologically adept. My NT group in my survey and my NFs thought that was great. All people were concerned about the multitasking causing distraction. All my types were concerned about too much private information on social media. All types were concerned with the advance of the internet, that no part of the world is immune to a trend. Once it posts, it zips around the world. Again, CTV News, the second and the third point, there was a mom on, and her child was in the back clicking on the phone and bought $1,200 worth of something. I don't know. She wasn't quite sure what she was getting in the mail. The pandemic has intensified the isolation for children because they have to use tablets. They have to use the internet. They maybe are even schooling through television. That's the positive, that they're able to do that they're able to connect, and we're able to talk, and I'm here, you're there. However, we have to be concerned about the negatives. And I thought more types I get more significant information from individual types. And I realized that when we looked at the negatives, it's just natural. It's not type related. We're concerned. And so there were some type related concerns within the negatives, but it was more so we were sort of one mind, I think, in this survey. Let's go on here. Now, these are my favorite slides because I think the one especially going to the museum, I think that there has to be a balance. And I think that we're moving so quickly that we have to take time to look at, what's happening with our kids. I know that elementary school teachers, workshops that I was doing a couple of years ago, say most schools try to ban phones. And they're very concerned when the little ones go out to play, that they don't have those kinds of skills anymore. So it was interesting, as elementary school teachers were especially concerned in that area, that children are losing that that ability to imagine and play and interact with each other without clicking, and even the young ones. So there were concerns there. And again, that was all type related for sure in the survey. We went to dinner and these two people were really kind. I took a picture with my phone and I asked them whether it was okay if I used it. But this is just so common, where we'll go out to eat and there'll be 4 people at the table, 2 kids, 2 parents, and everybody's on clicking. And I'm thinking, why are they having dinner together? It's very interesting. And so when someone asks me, do you have a cell phone? I say, yes, I'm sure I do have one somewhere. I just am not really sure where it is. So I think I'm becoming an anti-phoner. But I was amused by this. I thought, this is very interesting, and you see it so often. So I had to sort of add it into this is what's happening, today. And of course, as the little ones get a little older, they're all sitting, and I'm thinking, why are they out here together? Now, again, there's so many positives to our connections. Here we are, but there's so many negatives, and sometimes it's good to be that outlier and just say, why? 3 people here are talking, and here he is. He's using Wi-Fi. He's not talking to us. So it's maybe better to pull back and say, okay, let's just take a look at this again. Is this good for our interaction? Is this good for what's happening, to our personal relationships? I put this in because it makes my husband crazy when we go to dinner and someone is photographing their food, and she just makes him nuts. And so I put this in for him. I said to him last night, come and look at my slides. And he went, oh, I love that one. And at some point, he's just going to get up and go and, grab the food or grab the phone if they're taking a picture of their food. He's an ENFJ, and a really, really strong J. And he would like to let them know, but he's gracious, and he's fun and outgoing. So he doesn't. But I get to hear it later in the car going home. Now, this I took offense to. I've seen about 3 of these so far. I don't know, on Pinterest. This is the globally connected learning.com. And they're trying to connect literacy to all the possible ways that you can connect in the world. And so I bring it to your attention, because sometimes there's one thing we're concerned about, like my husband, sitting at dinner, having people take pictures or look at their phone. Or when I look at it, I think, no, we're there together. But when you start to see what we're seeing through advertising, through the people, telling us that this is connected to global literacy. It's connected to depressing global literacy. And yet it looks so flashy. So I thought, I want to just put this up. Very interesting what we're bombarded with sometimes, and how we have to be able to, really go back and look and say, is that really true? I don't think so. My friend sent me this because I went on Facebook because our nieces are on Facebook and I wanted to keep connected to them. And I put this in because it's a concern. I'm trying to make friends outside of Facebook, and she talks to passersby everywhere. I walk down the street and I tell them what I've eaten and how I feel and what I've done that night, and what will I do later and with whom. Excuse me. I give them pictures of my family, my gardening, my food, etc., etc., and it goes on and on. I give them a thumbs up. And it works just like Facebook. I already have 4 people following me, 2 officers, a private investigator, and a psychiatrist. I think Facebook is a concern for so many reasons that we've talked about, but it isn't the connector that we really hope and believe that it would be. Now, excuse me. When again, we've talked about this a lot, and this is another survey, is in the references again from television, from CTV or CBC, the Canadian Broadcasting Organization, or Canadian Television Viewing Organization. Children who had not learned to read or write were presented with a letter or shape. They reproduced it in 3 ways. This goes into the issue of movement and learning. Very, very important. And so I'm going to go to the end of this. The article was about what's lost as handwriting fades, because so many kids are on the computer. So many students are encouraged to learn keyboarding very early on. They're not writing, and a lot of educators here in North America are saying we shouldn't teach handwriting anymore. Well, children not only learn more quickly when they learn to write by hand, but they are also able to generate ideas and retain information much better. So that movement is very, very important. SPs know that. They know they need to move, they need to tap, they need to do all sorts of things. And my students, who've gotten kicked out of class for tapping, their feet tapping or whatever, very necessary. I mean, that's movement in itself. I find that if I really need to learn something and need to do something, I put it on a huge map and I write it out. And then I put it on the computer. I need to do it physically. And so did so many young people, especially the young people that were getting kicked out of their classes or else were really having difficulty that I would work with. But this is very, very significant, very important, that we have our young people still writing, still able to do hand, physical movement with their learning. It's very significant. Now, I have 2 things that are significant because this is called the world we live in. I will wrap this up very quickly. The whole issue, I don't know whether this is the case in Britain, but in North America, the epidemic of the tattoo is significant. That came up so much in my questionnaire that I talk to people about. And my friend that I worked with for years, he and I team worked together in our programs. He thought, he loves tattoos. He loves everybody tattooed everywhere. And he thought it was the democratization of art. He said sometimes art has been very, um, you know, elitist, and he thinks this is the reason that people are tattooed, and he thinks it's the democratization of art. Other people are slightly more concerned about the issue of tattooing, but it belongs in our time for sure. I remember my dad. My dad just passed away a little while ago, but he was 94, and he would have been 100 this year. So he certainly spanned our 100 years. He was sitting with one of our caregivers, and they were talking about tattoos. And he said the only people who were tattooed that he knew were people who were in the Navy or people who had been in prison. Now, it just happened that the two young women that I had working with him were from the Philippines, and they were young. I mean, they were in their 20s and 30s, but they were all talking about tattoos, and they were saying the same thing. Our caregiver said, I know, if you were in jail, or you had been doing drugs, or you were this sort of shady character, you were tattooed. And so it was interesting, some of the group from the questionnaire, the SJs, the NFJs especially, were concerned. They still felt kind of a stereotype with the whole issue of tattooing. It's an epidemic, and yet there's still those issues, and they certainly came out in some type related concerns. The last thing I think we'll have time to look at for sure, and this is the last section on our handout. Something that I think that I've noticed over the course of it would have been 40 years since I started, connecting in schools, and because I've been retired for a little while, but I taught for 32 years. Parents living the dream for children. And I've seen, I think over the course of my career, I saw quite a dramatic change in that. And so that was kind of an interesting one. And because we lived in I taught in a city that had an Olympic, that had the Olympics, that had an Olympic oval, that had Olympic skiing. I'm wondering whether I was more concerned about it, but I would see it with parents too. And I've lived through 3 or 4 suicides of my students who were pushed to be the best athlete, the best skier, go to medical school when they really wanted to be an art. They wanted to be an artist, but they were sent to Canada to become a doctor. And so I think there's still some negatives there. That's where some of the positives are. I think parents have looked at natural gifts of the young, and we've seen a shift, maybe sometimes dramatically too much, to what the child wants to do. But I think there's where the positives have come through, and that certainly came across with the questionnaire that I gave. There was more awareness for the need for mental health for our kids, especially if they were in high kind of stress situations. Parents were involved and much more supportive with their young people's interests. They cheered them on, they supported them. But there's still that, you can look up the helicopter parent, or the lawnmower parent, or the teen who, again, as I mentioned, sent to another country to become something other than what they wanted to be. So that was interesting. NSS in this handout is the National Sports School. And that was where we found a friend of mine I taught with in a previous school. He was a professional football player. He became the principal of the National Sports School. He would have me come and talk to his parent groups. Um, because of the stress and the strain and the pressure that the young people were getting. So us, he wanted someone else to come and talk to the parents about, pulling back and letting them do uh, what they could do, but that competing and but I got you this Russian coach at this expense, etc. And kind of that pushing because we do really need a medal because look at all the money we put into this. So there was a real negative there, and my friend was an ISTJ, and quite a few of his staff were INFP. They were all really concerned with the potential of burnout for kids at 18, 15 because of this. And so that was why I put that one in for sure. Now there because there were so many negatives to my tattooing group. I love this the grandpa who got a tattoo of a cochlear implant because his grandson had to have one. So I thought there are certainly a lot of positives as well with that. I think we'll conclude on this. I think I have a few more slides, but I think I want to finish on a happy note and just look at the end and say, I think we're all doing a pretty fine job at what we're doing, but what we are doing here and what we're doing in this conference is so important because to understand what the other needs, not what we want them to need or what we want them to want, but what they really need is so important. So to understand our opposites, to understand who that person is rather than what we would like them to be, I think is very significant. In conclusion, because so many of you are from Britain, I'm going to conclude by saying, I don't know why I became a teacher. I think I did it because my mom, um, she should have been a teacher. And she always would say to me, Marianne, you should teach grade 1 and 2 because they lose their teeth and they're so cute. And I thought, I don't know. I don't think that was the case anyway. But what I would have loved to have done, and I know now, at 70 some, if you're in Britain and you ever have an opportunity to either watch this program or go to this place, the Wheeled Down and Living Museum. It's in Singleton, West Sussex. It's the museum for those who want to touch, see, and even smell what life is really like. And what they do is they take works of art, pottery, anything, and they fix it and they make it beautiful again, and they use color and they paint or they do needlepoint or they do whatever. If I had known that this place existed when I was 18 years old, I would have been there. That's what I would have done as a career. I didn't, but I know what I would have liked to have done then. To use color, to use my hands, and to know that a place like that exists. I watch it all the time and I think, oh, I would have liked to have done that. Thank you so much for your time. My computer, it's a brand new computer, and I was a little unsure about using it, so I haven't let you make any comments. So I apologize for that. But I thought I didn't want to mess this up by clicking something and then losing you all. So the next time we meet, I absolutely want to hear from you. And I apologize for taking that much time where I didn't let you talk, but I was afraid I was afraid to leave my screen because I was afraid we'd never get back to it. Thank you for your time and enjoy the rest of the conference. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Marianne. I mean, I will keep the room open for a little while longer if people want to speak, and we will be sharing slides, fabulous graphics. So if you want to stop sharing, Marianne, then those who might want, I mean, there's been a lot of chat going on and I didn't want to interrupt you.
No, no problem.
So if you stop sharing, then you should be able to see everybody again, and I'll stop recording, but anyone who wants to stay and share ideas or talk with Marianne about her research, please do feel free to stay.